The latest release of GenerateBlocks gave us the new Carousel block, which of course got most of the attention because it's something a lot of people have been waiting for. But there's a sneaky good update in here you might have missed, and it's called Grid Areas. Now this is something that's existed in CSS Grid for a while, but we didn't have these controls here inside GenerateBlocks, and now we do. Now Grid Areas might not be intuitive at first, but hopefully in this demonstration you'll see how it works, and for a lot of people this makes CSS Grid even more approachable and easier to wrap your mind around. So let me show you how it works. Okay, so we're here in Figma where I got kind of just a grid layout kind of mocked up. This is going to help us visualize everything we're going to have to do inside the editor here. So you can see we have this grid set up here. It's got 9 boxes inside of it. All of them are just taking up one cell in our grid essentially. But let's go ahead and give these some colors just to represent some kind of bento grid. So I'm going to grab these first 3 across the top and we're just going to change those to red. I'll grab these 2 over on the left and maybe we'll change these to purple. We'll grab these 2 kind of in the middle here and I'll change these to maybe kind of a bluish teal color. We'll go down to our bottom right one and we can change this to green, and then we'll change this one here to pink. So now we have kind of a bento grid layout that we can see on our screen here. Now you can do this with spans and by manually setting all these columns, but the way grid area works, I think it's a little bit easier to keep track of what is going where. So I'm just going to grab my text tool real quick and we're just going to type in here red, since we know this first cell in our grid is going to be red. And obviously this won't be content on the page, but I just kind of want to represent what each one of these cells is going to be called. So across our first row here, we have red, red, red. And then if we go down to our second box, which is this purple one, we'll call it purple. And we'll go ahead and duplicate that down here since we know that one's purple as well. Here, I kind of meant to go for a teal color, even though it doesn't really look teal. We'll go ahead and put teal in those 2 boxes. And then here we'll put pink. And then in the last one, we'll put green. So basically what we've done is gone ahead and named each one of these cells in our grid. Now, really what we're going to have is 5 pieces of content or 5 containers. There'll be 1 container here for this red group. There'll be 1 container here for this purple one. There'll be 1 for this teal, that makes 3, and then 4 for pink and number 5 for green. So we're going to end up with 5 containers. So let's see how we can take this idea and put it into GenerateBlocks using the grid areas. So here inside of GenerateBlocks, you can see that I've gone ahead and set up a section with a wrapper that's just going to constrain everything to our max content width. And then inside of it, I have our 5 different containers. Let's go ahead and rename these just so we can keep track of them. I'll call my first one red, and then I'll rename the rest of these quickly. So I've gone ahead and named all these. That's not something you have to do for this, but just to keep track of everything as we're doing this demo. Now, the only thing I've done to each one of these containers is given them their background color just so we can see on the screen what's happening. And then I've gone ahead and given them a minimum height of 300 pixels. That's just because they're not going to take up any space without any content inside of them. And for the demo, I just want you to be able to see that something's on the screen. But obviously in a real life scenario, you'd be putting some kind of content inside of here. All right, so what we're going to do is go to our wrapper here, which is holding all of our boxes, and we're going to go into the display and change the display to grid. Now, by default, a grid is just 1 column wide, so everything's going to look the same right now. But the magic happens here inside this grid template areas. So if we go back and reference our Figma drawing again, we can see our first row here, we had red, red, red. So we're going to repeat that same thing inside of GenerateBlocks here. Now you do have to start it with a quote mark, so I'll go ahead and open my quote mark. Each row in this is going to have a quote mark. So we'll type in red, space, red, space, red, and then go ahead and close our quote marks. So now what you can see here inside GenerateBlocks looks exactly like what we had here inside Figma, red, red, red. Now let's start working on this second row of boxes. So here we're going to have purple, teal, teal. So we'll go ahead and just repeat that same thing here inside GenerateBlocks. I'm going to go down to a new line, open up my parentheses, and we're going to do purple, teal, teal, and then I can close my quote marks. We'll go back into Figma and look at our last row here, which is purple, pink, green. So we'll go back in here, go down to a new line, open up our quote marks, and we'll do purple, pink, green. Go ahead and close those quote marks. So now we've gotten our grid template areas set up, and now we just need to assign each one of our boxes to that area. So we'll go to our red one here. we'll go inside of our layout, and under the grid layout section, we'll go down here to grid area, and this is where we just type in the name of the named grid cell. So in this case, this is just red. And you can see as soon as we do that, it's just putting this container in all the spaces that were labeled red. We'll do the same thing for our purple here, which if we remember should be in this first column, but span 2 rows. So if I go into grid area and type in purple, we can see now it's staying in this first column, but spanning 2 rows. We'll do the same thing with our teal, that's teal. And then pink and green are actually fitting in where they're supposed to, but I'm gonna go ahead and explicitly tell them where to live. So here we'll go ahead and change that to green. So now inside of our wrapper, we have this set to grid, and we've set up those grid template areas, red, 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 purple, teal, teal, purple, pink, green, and everything's lining up just the way it was inside of Figma. Being able to give these names just makes it easier to kind of visualize where everything's gonna go. For example, let's say we wanted to change this layout slightly. Let's say instead of this layout, we wanted to do something more like this, where purple takes up 3 rows in our first column here, then red kind of sneaks off to the side. So if we wanted to change that, all we'd have to do is go back in here to our wrapper where we've set all these grid template areas. The only thing we changed was this first cell. So if I just change this to the word purple, now we can see this purple container is taking up all 3 rows, but staying in the first column. And now our red is staying over here in the second column, because that's exactly how we've written it out here in the grid template areas. It's a very visual way to be able to represent your grid on the screen. Obviously, you'd probably want some kind of gap in here, so we can create some kind of gap. And now we have a nice setup for our bento grid. Now by default, each one of these grid columns are just taking up an equal amount of space, and that's because we didn't declare anything in the grid template columns. But if, for example, we just wanted this purple box to be 300 pixels wide, and then these other 2 columns take up as much room as they could, we could say 300 pixels, 1 FR, 1 FR, and that's gonna go ahead and shrink down our grid. So now that purple box is 300 pixels wide. You can see if I just went ahead and changed that to 100 pixels where it got really skinny, you can control the grid template columns separate from these grid areas. So really you can use these grid template columns to set up the sizing for everything, and then the areas to just name everything. A better example might be we want this first column to be 2 FRs and then the next 2 to be 1 FR each. And now we can see that this purple box is taking up half of our container, and then everything over on the right is taking up the other half, which is kind of being subdivided for some of these elements. So let's try another example here with maybe some more real content. So what I have here is a section with a wrapper, and then inside of it, I have 3 different containers. One is the image, which just has the image inside. The next is my content, which has all these paragraphs inside of it. And then the last is a little CTA section that has a headline, a paragraph, and a button inside of it. But let's say we wanted to lay this out more like an article where we have a big featured image at the top, the content on the left, and then the CTA over in a sidebar on the right. We can use these same principles here to use our grid template areas to name all these different areas and then assign everything. But this time, let's start by giving each one of these their name. So we'll go down here to our CTA. I'll go in here into my grid area, and I'm just going to label this CTA. We'll go into our content, and we'll call this content. And then we'll go into our image, and we'll call this grid area image. Now everything is kind of messed up right now because we haven't told the grid all these different areas. So let's go back here to our wrapper. We're going to make sure that this is set to display of grid, and let's go ahead and go with that 3-column layout again. So I'm just going to use the helper here for the repeat 3 min max 0 1 FR, and then we can go into our grid template areas and start naming these. So we said we wanted our image to stretch across the entire top. So I'll do image, image, image. That will make sure that it takes up 3 columns. Then we'll do content, content, CTA. And now we can see we have our image spanning across the first 3 columns, our content spanning across 2, and then our CTA in this last one over here. But the nice thing about naming it like this is if we decided we wanted our CTA on the left, we could just delete it out of that area here and write CTA at the beginning. And now our CTA is over here on the left with our text on the right. Let's go ahead and just give a little bit of gap in between all this so it's a little bit easier to see. And now we can play around with it even more. Let's say we wanted our CTA to span across the entire top and our image just be over here on the left. We could go in here where it says image and change this to CTA 3 different times so it spans across 3 columns. And then we'll do image, content, content. Now we can see that our CTA spans across all three of these. Our image is over here on the left and content is on the right. Maybe we want our image to be twice as big as our content. We can just change that to image, image, content. So there's all kinds of different ways you can play around with this to get everything looking the way you want. In fact, we could do one more here. Let's get rid of our CTA. And under here, we can do CTA, CTA, content, and go ahead and close our quote marks. And now we can see our image and CTA are stacked on top of each other with the content over on the right. Again, if you don't like that look, you can just play around with all these grid areas, and that will help you get everything in line just the way you want. Now we have our image and our CTA just taking up one column here with all of our text over on the right. So it's really flexible and it's a little bit more visual since you're just naming these things, something human readable that you can remember. Instead of having to count the number of columns or rows, we can just go in here and give all of these a name that we can remember and then assign each one of our pieces of content to those names. I hope this demonstration did a good job of showing you how grid template areas works and how you can name all your different grid areas. For me, having something visual, something I can name that's human readable, really made CSS Grid a little bit easier to use. Now, grid areas aren't really the best fit for every single situation, but especially for things like bento grids, being able to name all those areas and then just place things where you want them is a whole lot easier than trying to fumble around with a bunch of different spans and counting grid rows. Now, this can also be helpful in making sure your content is a little bit more accessible, because oftentimes you want the visual order of something to be different than what it should be inside the DOM. These grid areas give you the ability to easily manipulate where things show up on the front end and keep your content structured properly inside the DOM so everything's stacked like it's supposed to be. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you want to make sure to catch the next one, hit subscribe and we'll see you then.